A major scandal has swept across all of America these days. Qatar's high-profile, ostentatious gift to Donald Trump turned out to endanger the American president's life. The presidential plane couldn't bring Donald Trump home from Turkey after the NATO summit because a dangerous vulnerability was found on it. And this happened even after extensive checks by the Secret Service. Imagine, it's Friday evening, you're a journalist, having dinner at home with your family, and suddenly federal agents ring your doorbell with a subpoena requiring you to testify under oath before a grand jury and essentially reveal your sources just because your article in the newspaper upset President Donald Trump. According to the New York Times, this is exactly what happened to 4 of its reporters. In the eyes of the Trump administration, their fault was that they published an article about the new Air Force One, that same luxurious plane that Qatar gave to Trump, and which Trump was forced to abandon in Turkey after the NATO summit because it turned out to be dangerous. In this episode, we'll break down exactly what the New York Times journalists wrote that started this whole campaign against them. Why did the gifted plane worth $400 million turn out to be such a sensitive issue? How do the White House and the U.S. Department of Justice explain such a generous and unprecedented move with agents at the doorstep of journalists' homes? Why is this not just a one-time incident, but another link in the long chain of Donald Trump's pressure on the press? My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. We're moving toward 300,000 subscribers and I would personally appreciate your support. Subscribe so you don't miss out.
This is very unique. This is considered the world's most luxurious plane when it was built. It was built at a level that will probably never be seen again. And if the press would like, I don't know if it's going to help me with stories. I don't think they'll be any different. But what we're going to do is we're going to take you for just a quick tour. The press is actually going to look at them. They're actually smiling. Are you smiling?
So let's start with what actually happened. 4 journalists from the New York Times, Julian Barnes, Eric Lipton, Tyler Pager, and Eric Schmidt, received subpoenas from the United States Department of Justice. They were required to testify before a federal grand jury in Manhattan as early as next Wednesday. And what gives the story an almost cinematic intensity is that some of the subpoenas were delivered to the reporters' homes by federal agents, and it happened on a Friday evening. The wording in the subpoenas is intentionally vague. The journalists are being summoned to testify, quote, in connection with an alleged violation of federal criminal law. No specifics, no particular law is mentioned. And the subpoenas were issued by the prosecutor of the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, the same one whom Trump recently nominated for the position of Director of National Intelligence. Which only leads one to think that, in essence, it is Donald Trump himself who is summoning the journalists to court. The editorial staff at the New York Times responded immediately and sharply. The chief legal counsel of the editorial staff, David McCraw, stated that the appearance of federal agents at the doorsteps of reporters, quote, should shake the conscience of any American who believes in the Constitution. He called it a brazen act and directly described it as an attempt to prevent the public from learning what is happening in the country by intimidating journalists. The New York Times announced that it will challenge these subpoenas in court, calling them a direct threat to the press's ability to gather information in the public interest. But what started all of this? It all started with a gift. Last year, let me remind you, the government of Qatar gave Donald Trump Air Force One. It's a Boeing 747 that underwent an expensive upgrade costing about $400 million, and it literally entered service just last week. Just last week, Trump made a grand show of it to the public and even flew on it to Turkey for the NATO summit. And here, journalists from the New York Times uncovered something awkward. On Wednesday, the newspaper, citing anonymous sources, reported that the Secret Service strongly recommended that Donald Trump leave the recent NATO summit in Turkey, not on a brand new Boeing from Qatar, but on an old version of Air Force One. And all for security reasons. And the next day, the publication added an even sharper detail, stating that the plane gifted by Qatar, as it turned out, was missing, quote, defensive countermeasure systems that were present in the old model, including advanced anti-missile capabilities. Simply put, the plane has no air defense or anti-missile protection. And this is happening while Iran has started openly threatening to eliminate Donald Trump. Just think about the context. All this was happening at the moment when the fragile truce between the US and Iran collapsed. The US was striking Iran, and Tehran was attacking the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf. Turkey, where Trump arrived on a brand new plane from Qatar, actually borders Iran, so it's really close, and Trump himself admitted that Iran could really kill him. After that, the following happens. Trump arrives at the NATO summit in Ankara on a new plane. It's pompous, it's beautiful. But on the way back home to the US, he takes a completely different route, and on top of that, he's flying on the old plane, which was quickly brought to Turkey. It's funny that when Trump was asked why he switched from the new plane to the old one, he replied that he's flying on the old plane, quote, for old time's sake. But the New York Times article hinted at something else, that the expensive gift from Qatar is simply less protected against missiles. And actually, the presidential plane is flying right next to Iran, with whom the US is at war. For President Trump, who keeps saying he's the #1 target on Iran's list, publications claiming that his new plane is less protected are a blow both to his image and his political narrative. Of course, the US authorities have their own version, and it should be mentioned as well. The White House rejected the claims about the plane's security. Press Secretary Stephen Chun stated that the new Air Force One is a state-of-the-art aircraft equipped with the highest security protocols. Moreover, he actually turned the accusation into a supposed advantage. According to him, America has many enemies targeting President Trump, and the authorities are using, quote, any tool, including distraction and disorientation. So, in other words, the change of planes was presented as a clever maneuver, not as an admission of vulnerability. The Department of Justice of the United States, in turn, has built a key line of defense. They say the target is not journalists, but officials who leak classified information. Here's the question. If everything is fine with the plane, then what kind of classified information could the officials have leaked? Why is there such a fuss then? They say that if journalists, according to the Department of Justice, reveal their sources, if they expose those officials who gave them the information, then the journalists won't face any consequences for the material. And the representative of the Justice Department emphasized that the Trump administration is concerned about people leaking classified information, not the reporters. That's a fundamental argument. I mean, formally, these subpoenas are supposedly aimed at the leaks, not at the press. But there's a detail that, according to critics, reveals the true meaning. Before the New York Times published the material on Wednesday, a high-ranking FBI official called one of the reporters and an editor at the publication and asked them to hold the article and not release it yet, of course without explaining why. Just imagine an FBI official calls a reporter and an editor and says, I know you have an article ready, don't publish it, no, under no circumstances. And he also asked them to name the sources for this material, but both New York Times employees refused to do so. After that, subpoenas followed. Why is this whole story important? And here is the most important thing for understanding the scale. This is not the only case. As American media note, the move to issue subpoenas is another escalation in years-long efforts. In Donald Trump's efforts to rein in and control the mass media. The chain is very long: a financial settlement with ABC News, an agreement with the program 60 Minutes on CBS, civil lawsuits, federal actions against the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, BBC, CNN, and so on and so on. Earlier this year, the FBI searched Washington Post reporter Hannah Nathanson and seized her phones and laptops. This happened with Kana Nathanson confiscating her phones and laptops as part of an investigation into, again, leaks. She was reporting on the administration's efforts to cut the federal workforce. They approached her and demanded, "Who told you that, huh? Come on, give us your phone, laptop, everything. We're searching you now. We're going to pressure you because how dare you mention your sources? Hand them over quickly." Well, I'm not even mentioning the fact that Trump constantly insults the media. Fake news, that's his favorite phrase. Well, that's just unbelievable. He just calls everyone names however he wants, and apparently he considers that freedom of speech. There's still an important detail that gives us hope. Not long ago, the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal were secretly engaged in a legal battle against the Trump administration's attempts to subpoena their reporters. And in those cases, the Justice Department eventually withdrew its subpoenas, so there was already a precedent for the authorities backing down. Human rights advocates make the point very clearly. The head of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, Stephen Adler, stated that freedom of the press is ultimately the right of society itself to know how the country is governed. And the representative of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, Seth Stern, said something that is probably worth remembering as the conclusion of this whole story. When the government claims that it is investigating a journalist or journalists for national security, in reality, it is more often protecting its own reputational security, nothing more. Conclusion. Formally, this is a story about the leak of secret data regarding the US president's plane. But if you remove all these official phrases, here's what's left. Journalists wrote an inconvenient truth about the gift from Qatar. Well, they wrote it just as it was. And after that, on Friday evening, federal agents come to their homes with subpoenas. The White House calls it protection against leaks and concern for security. The New York Times and human rights advocates call it intimidation of the press and a blow to the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. And here is the most important point. If journalists can be dragged into court for an article about the presidential plane being less protected against missiles, then the issue is no longer about the Boeing itself. The question is, what can you even write about the authorities in a country that built itself 250 years ago on the right to do so? On that very right to free speech, then Donald Trump comes along and says, I don't care about your freedom of speech. How is that possible? Some newspaper, the New York Times, dared to write that something was wrong with my plane. And at the end, I'll add one very important detail. Here, Donald Trump's supporters are all shouting in unison that it was a gift from Qatar, like, well, the plane was given for free. But they don't forget to add that $400 million from the pockets of American citizens was spent on its refitting, modernization, and repairs. And it ended with this plane not even being able to fly the American president from Turkey to America. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, like the video, and hit the bell icon. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. I will be grateful for any support you can give. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.